Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and this is Disaster Zone, a show about gearing up for emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. Today we're talking about emergency communications. You know, in the 9/11 terrorist attack, 300 firefighters died, many due to faulty communications. It became apparent that good communications are key in any disaster. One solution might be FirstNet, a new national wireless network just for public safety and other first responders. My guest today is Bill Schreier, who is the FirstNet point of contact for Washington State. In Bill's former life, he was the City of Seattle's Information and Telecommunications Director. And today, he's responsible for helping to implement FirstNet here in Washington State. Thanks for joining us. And Bill, I think it'd be a great show to share information. I know a lot of first responders, fire, police, emergency managers. I mentioned FirstNet the other day, and there's a lot of blank stares. So this would be good to get the information out. So thanks for being on the show here.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Okay. And there is life after King County and after the City of Seattle. Here we are back together working on something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this first question, it's kind of a long one here, but interoperability in telecommunications. It's been a hot topic as I introduced for 9/11. And a lot of that has been really about voice communications and to a great degree, and a lot of good work's been done. But today data is really a critical issue. So what's being done nationally to address interoperability for, I'd say, data communications, wireless communications?
Well, Congress last year recognized that there was a problem with interoperability on data communications. And data communications is computers, tablet computers, smartphones that are used by responders. And so they passed the Spectrum Act in February of 2012. And that act created the First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, to create a nationwide network for where first responders will have priority, but really any responder can use to respond to disasters or daily incidents and use data communications or their tablet computers or smartphones to assist in that response.
So, first responders today, I mean, I've seen police and fire out there using a smartphone themselves now. What systems are they using today?
Well, today they'll use a commercial wireless network, just like any consumer will. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint are examples, or any of the cellular carriers. The trouble is that they have no priority on those networks. So your teenager, if you have a teenager, and her iPhone have the same priority as a police officer or firefighter. And during times when there's a lot of congestion, baseball game, for example, or a major incident, those responders will not have priority and they won't be able to use their devices.
Okay. So how's that, the federal program, FirstNet, fitting into this solution? I could see some people saying, well, can't you just carve out some of that civilian spectrum, have to do it through the commercial companies versus a government solution?
Well, in the Spectrum Act, the act that Congress passed last year, they actually allocated separate frequencies or separate spectrum space, 20 megahertz, which is a lot of spectrum space, in the 700 megahertz band for this network. Now, you could technically carve out some spectrum from commercial carriers, but first of all, they're licensed for it. And secondly, anybody who's got a smartphone or a tablet today will know that at times it slows down because it's already congested. Right. So already there's a shortage of speed and throughput or capacity on the commercial networks.
Okay. And so, what's driving this, what I've seen is, it used to be voice communications really critically important. We had the radio systems, but now there's so much more data being transmitted and I've seen it for video is really the growing field. That's a bandwidth hog, I guess, or a data hog. I don't know. But then just other data, whether I guess license plate data being shared back and forth. It's not just on the radio. It's being digitally transmitted. Is that what's driving it? Is it that usage or?
Yes, it's that sort of thing. So first of all, I do want to say that voice communications is still critical for first responders and for most other responders, utilities, for example. It's still the lifeline. However, increasingly they cannot do their jobs, cops and firefighters, emergency medical, without connections to data. And I'll just give one example. Think of an emergency medical, Medic 1 here in King County. When those folks, when Medic 1 responds to a life-threatening emergency, they need to be in touch with the emergency room. They need to be able to send telemetry and data. They need to pull up the patient's health care records. All of that requires data that they get from a data communications connection or a wireless network.
Okay, and we're moving to the point where emergency room docs will be able to see patients perhaps on a video and assist the paramedic. I don't know, we're not there yet, but that type of capability is in the future.
That's exactly the goal, and as a matter of fact, that is being done to some extent on commercial networks now, where it's two-way video between an emergency room and a patient in the field.
A paramedic, okay. So who can use FirstNet? Because I know typically when we say first responders, a lot of folks say, well, that's fire and police, but it appears to me there's a broader definition for FirstNet.
That's a great question, and that's actually true. So FirstNet, Congress allocated $7 billion to build this network, but specified that it be nationwide, and they gave FirstNet 10 years to do it, although it's really got to be done in a much shorter time. Now, it's a first responder network because first responders have priority, but Congress broadened the definition of public safety. They recognize that in a hurricane situation or an earthquake, you may want to evacuate 1 million people from Houston. That actually occurred during Hurricane Ike, for example. That requires responders like transportation officials, it requires transit, it requires a wide variety of folks to actually coordinate in advance. After a hurricane or earthquake, you've got to restore electrical power, you've got to restore water, you've got, so water utilities and electric utilities are responders in that particular case. Electric utilities, really, even here in the Northwest after a windstorm, power will be out. That's a real public safety, public health hazard. And it's stupid for a cop or a firefighter to be standing by a downed electrical line if you could dispatch an electric utility. So those are some of the examples of other responders that are also critical to public safety.
And I know nonprofits are in that mix.
Yes, that's right. Nonprofits and even private utilities, private electric utility, for example. In terms of nonprofits, we would hope that ambulance companies or volunteer firefighters who don't necessarily get paid would also be part of FirstNet.
So Red Cross, Salvation
definitely.
Army.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So, with this broad definition, I mean, it's a lot. Actually, you've covered all three sectors. I mean, public, private, nonprofit. Isn't there a danger that will overload FirstNet and it'll be like the commercial things that, it's too congested?
There is a danger for that. Now, even if you got all those responders on FirstNet, you'd still only have 3 to 5 to 10 million at most. Whereas the commercial networks will have 40 million, 50 million, or 100 million or more. So there's still not a lot of users. But the question is, what are the applications that are running across the network? You mentioned video, for example, earlier. Think about all the dash cams in police vehicles that could be sending video or the video surveillance. So what FirstNet will have, it'll use a technology called LTE, or long-term evolution. And you can see that on advertisements for commercial networks. LTE has special knobs and adjustments so that you can shut off the video or slow video from, say, 30 frames per second, which is what your viewers are watching right now, to say 1 frame per second. So you're only seeing 1 frame per second, which will use a lot less bandwidth.
And that would decongest
It will decongest. So, and it's also a question of priority. You might have to shut off some users at a lower priority so first responders can use the network.
And all that would be automated in it.
Well, a lot of it will be automated, but somebody's got to have their hands on the knobs, and somebody locally, like if it's here in Seattle or if it's in Tacoma, somebody locally who's familiar with the situation, the incident commander, should really have hands on the knobs.
Okay. That sounds a little complex to me.
It could be complex, but it's very similar to what goes on in voice networks today.
So, funding a new program like this, as you've described, is always an issue. I mean, we're not talking chump change here. I think you mentioned $7 billion for the national. And we're reminded how bad the federal budget is almost every day. Where's this funding for the new system coming?
Well, that's a great question. So Congress allocated the $7 billion from the sale of spectrum. So for example, the telecommunications carriers, Verizon and AT&T and so forth, actually purchased the right to use spectrum today. And there's more spectrum that will be made available that those carriers or others could license. That money from that sale of spectrum is estimated to be $26 billion or more over the next 8 years.
Okay.
$7 billion of that was allocated to FirstNet. So FirstNet's not coming from general tax revenues or income taxes. It's coming from the sale of spectrum.
Is it only a down payment, or do you think there's more money behind it, or not necessarily?
Well, that's the $7 billion question. If you wanted to build a network from scratch, nationwide, $35 billion, $50 billion, or $100 billion. $7 billion, even though it's a lot of money, won't do it. So FirstNet's going to have to use existing assets and infrastructure. For example, the state of Washington or the city of Seattle or King County have radio sites, they have fiber, they have existing assets which could be used to build this network rather than building entirely new towers. So that's one way to get around the funding constraint.
Okay. Well, listen, Bill, what I'd like to do is come back to this funding discussion after we take this break and watch this item, and then we're going to be back, talk more about money. We love talking about money here, but really the operations and maintenance of FirstNet. How's that going to be handled, and who sets the priorities for this system? So stay tuned, and we will be right back after this message.
In the event of a catastrophe, you need to know what to do to make it through. By preparing now, you and your family will have a better chance of surviving when a catastrophe happens. Here are 3 tips to get you started. Have an emergency plan with meeting places and an out-of-area contact. Prepare a supply kit for your family and pets that includes what you need to survive for 7 to 10 days. And be prepared to help each other. Start now and take the first step to protect the ones you love. For more information, visit makeitthrough.org or find us on Facebook.
Hi, I'm Eric Holdeman. Today's show on Disaster Zone is about public safety communications and building a wireless network just for first responders. We've been talking first half of the show with Bill Schreier, guest, and we're going to pick up kind of where we left off, Bill, with this federal system. We were talking about the money side of it, and you mentioned what it's going to cost to build the system out. But as we all know, and I've been asked this many times, what about operations and maintenance costs? So it isn't like you build it and then you're done. It has to be kept running. You need staff, you need continuing tweaking. There's a lot of software involved now with communication systems.
Yeah, so operational costs are a big issue. So first responders or all responders, all users of this network will have to pay for it. They'll have to pay a monthly subscriber fee just like they do to their existing commercial networks. Hopefully that fee will be no more than they pay to the commercial networks or very close to it. The trouble is that with only 3 million to 5 million, 10 million at most users, it's going to be hard to pay those operational costs. So that's one of the big unanswered questions in FirstNet. And until we see their design and business plan, we won't know what it is or how the operational costs will be funded.
So, Bill, you talked about using some of the existing system. Now, public safety standards are not necessarily what commercial standards are as far as having hardened facilities, a tower, the base sites, stuff like that. So, will they need to be hardened?
Yes, absolutely. Katrina tells us, for example, the Hurricane Katrina, the cellular networks were completely down. In many cases, cellular towers only have 8 hours of battery backup. So if the electric power is out, they'll go down after 8 hours. So we've got to define what public safety grade is. And there's actually an effort going on right now to define public safety grade. But it will include things like backup generators. It'll include things like having 2 feeds to the site, 2 connections to the site, multiple paths. Okay. It'll include strengthening the towers to better withstand windstorms or hurricanes. But yes, this network, any infrastructure that's used today, towers for example, needs to be strengthened to public safety grade.
Okay. And now you got a national project that they're rolling out, and you have to break it down somehow how you do it. And I understand doing it state by state. So how is that being done here nationally? I just explained that state by state mode, and then here in Washington State.
Well, the Spectrum Act, which Congress passed last year, actually is fairly convoluted. One of the things that it requires is that FirstNet present a design, the FirstNet being a federal authority, present a design for each individual state and territory. So Washington State will get a design, as will every other state. When that happens, the governor needs to make an opt-in or opt-out decision whether to accept the design or opt out and reject the design and have us build it ourselves. We, the state government, build it ourselves.
Okay. So I know I've read some things, they talk about stages. So how many stages are and is this stage one then? Or?
So again, this is Bill Schreier's interpretation, which is mostly official. But so stage one is outreach and education. It's contacting potential users of the network throughout the state, telling them that FirstNet is coming down the pike, and gathering their input as to what sort of coverage is required, what the users are. Stage two is a data collection. So what sites do you have, City of Spokane or Pierce County? What radio sites, what fiber assets, what buildings that can be used to build this network? Stage three is the design, where FirstNet does a design, and hopefully that's collaborative with states, and puts this design together for the state. Then the governor makes an opt-in, opt-out decision. Then we go to construction, and then we go to agency adoption.
Yeah.
Just because this network is being built doesn't mean that an agency has to use it, a city or a county.
Yeah.
And finally, we go into operations and maintenance.
A lot of times we talk about Washington State being a home rule state. So each county and city and government has an opportunity to make their own decisions there. So
that's exactly right.
Okay. Sounds pretty complex to do this. So we're in stage one. Currently, and I call you the missionary out there.
Evangelist.
Evangelist. Spreading the word on this. When did you start working on this, and where are we in that process of spreading the word? I know this is part of that work, but where are we?
Well, I started working on this in 2010. Actually, when I was the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Seattle, the City of Seattle got authority on its own to build one of these networks.
Okay.
But then later in February of 2012, when Congress passed the Spectrum Act to do a nationwide network, we lost that authority. So I've been working on this since 2010. I went to work for the state of Washington in May of this year, and specifically I went to work to do this particular project, to be the point of contact in Washington State for FirstNet, and to contact as many stakeholders as possible in Washington State.
Okay. And how much do people know about FirstNet now? I mean, as you talk about it, is this, when you talk about it, it's the first time they've heard of it, or?
Boy, in general, they know very little. Yeah. Some people, chiefs of police, for example, who've been active in this work nationwide, know what FirstNet is, or people have heard the term FirstNet. But in general, even responders don't know that this particular network is under construction. So I've been on an active campaign to talk to sheriffs and police chiefs and fire commissioners, Indian tribes, because Indian tribes are explicitly included, county commissioners and mayors, to inform them about the project.
Okay. And having worked for a port, don't forget the ports.
I will not forget the ports.
All right. So why would a state not opt in? I mean, what would cause them not to want to opt in?
So my goal as the FirstNet point of contact is to gather input from all the stakeholders in the state, to have them participate in the design, so when the design is presented to the state of Washington, they already know what it is and can advise the governor. There's only one good reason why a governor would opt out, and that would be if the design is insufficient. If it doesn't cover the parts of the state that are critical to be covered, if it doesn't cover users that the state, like Indian tribes, for example, that the state wants to see covered, and then the governor could opt out. And that means we'd have to build the network ourselves as the state, and we'd have to contribute 20% of the cost. But the only good reason to opt out is poor design by FirstNet.
Okay. And kind of managing expectations, because there's some people have been advocating for FirstNet, saying that it needs to cover every square meter of the United States. As you look at Washington State, Washington State's a large geographic state. What would you say in managing expectations that FirstNet, what's it really going to be able to cover? And I know it's a guess, that requires the technical work and all that, but I just don't see it covering all of the Cascades and that.
Yeah, as you said, there are a lot of remote square meters in Washington State, and Alaska and other places. Yeah. So realistically, we would want it to cover any place where there's an incident or a potential problem, where we know that's populated, where we know that there could be a fire, for example, or a public safety incident. And we'll cover the rest, or I would hope FirstNet would cover the rest, through deployables. Just yesterday, I saw an example of a backpack. It looks like a backpack, essentially, which is a complete site, which could be carried to a scene of a wildfire, for example, or it could be mounted on a fire apparatus, and actually create the network where it's needed in remote areas.
Okay, a very mobile type.
Very mobile solution.
Okay.
Others have thought about drones, or drones that carry radio transmitters, or balloons.
All right.
So those are some places to cover, or ways to cover places that are pretty remote.
And the governor's going to make the call on whether opting in, opting out, but who's managing this? I mean, you're doing this evangelistic work and all that, but who do you report to, and then how's that a recommendation?
Well, I'm the one who's managing it, Bill Schreier,
Yes.
in the office of the Chief Information Officer of the state of Washington. For this particular work, I work directly with FirstNet, and I report to the CIO, the Chief Information Officer of the state of Washington.
Okay, but how's it going to, is there a interjurisdictional body, multidiscipline, that's involved with this also? I mean, I understand you're a direct change of command, but then
there is a
stakeholder group.
There is a major stakeholder group, which is the State Interoperable Communications Executive Committee, SIEC, State Interoperable Executive Committee.
Okay.
And that's siec.wa.gov. Okay. And that's composed of police chiefs, sheriffs, the chief of the state patrol, the chief of the National Guard, General Doherty, are all on the SIEC, and that is the governing body, if you will, for this work.
Now that was a very law enforcement centric list there, but there's Fire Chiefs Association is involved with that?
That's right. There's a fire chief from Pierce County, the Washington Department of Transportation and the Washington DNR are on the SIEC.
Okay.
Again, siec.wa.gov has got the full list of members.
Okay, but then that doesn't include currently any of the nonprofits or the private sector utilities that have an opportunity to participate either at this point.
That is correct. And last month in September, I asked the SIEC to give me authority to form a stakeholders committee, a broader stakeholders committee of all those sorts of responders, cities, counties, tribes, private utilities.
Okay. So we're getting near the end, but I got a couple questions I want to squeeze in, so you can be succinct here. But what's the timeline for implementing FirstNet?
So the life of FirstNet is 10 years from February of 2012. I'm thinking, or I'm hoping, that the opt-in, opt-out decision might occur by 2015, and we might have a network here in Washington State by 2017. But that's my best guess.
Okay, that's a challenging timeline.
That's a challenging timeline.
To do that. Okay. So if someone wants to have input to this whole process and the decision being made by the governor or how the system's being structured, how would they participate in that?
Well, the best way to do it right now is to contact me. And again, my contact information, Bill Schreier, is on that siec.wa.gov. And we'll get you added to a list and potentially the stakeholders committee, and also keep you informed, your listeners informed, or you, Eric, about the progress of this project.
Okay. And then anything else you'd want to share? We got about a minute left.
Well, there's a lot of challenges. We've talked about some of the challenges. How do you fund it? How do you operationalize it? How do you fund the ongoing operation? Mm-hmm. How do you do all the remote sites? But this is a chance. This is a chance to create a truly interoperable network nationwide. So when the big one hits here in Washington State, the Category 9 earthquake, and we need help from electric utilities in Portland, and cops from Denver, and firefighters from San Francisco, all those folks can come here to Washington State and communicate interoperably without having a lot of mess or hassle. And if we build this network right, the public safety grade, it will survive that Category 9 earthquake.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to be following this very closely myself because my professional interest in that. We wish you well in your endeavor in getting that done. And I think you very well described what's being done by government to do this. But last word for the day here, Bill, and for our audience is, you have to do your part too. Government's doing its piece, Red Cross is doing its piece, the cities and counties, what have you. But if you haven't done anything to get ready for disaster, today is a great day to start. And we'll see you next time here at Disaster Zone. Bye-bye.